My pathetic attempt to record an opening, introduction or something, because for some reason I feel like if you're going to do any sort of a podcast, you should have some kind of an opening introduction. And I'll tell you, it's funny because my most favorite podcasts do not have opening songs. They have like opening bits, like clips of a comedy bit. And I don't think it's as effective. I don't think it's as... It might be for like a younger generation who didn't grow up with any kind of radio. Excuse the background noise right now. I'm just trying to like gather my coffee, which I probably should have done before pressing record. But if you grew up with like radio shows, even if you grew up with Stern or especially something like an NPR show like This American Life, having like an opening song or an opening jingle is kind of nice. It kind of feels like you're officially about to begin something. And I'll tell you who's got one of the best. Being a podcast fan, is Conan O'Brien's Looking for a Friend. That has one of the best opening songs, and it uses that Jack the White Stripes song. The one that's like, back to school, blah, blah, blah. That thing. Excuse me, I apologize for this introduction, because what I wanted to talk about today is one of the things that I try so hard not to dwell on, but I also don't actually sit down and think about it in detail very often. I think that I've gotten really good at compartmentalizing, and I'm starting to understand people who have gone through something traumatic and how the brain works and how the brain deals with that. I'm so sorry for the background noise. It's over. But yeah, I have a new understanding of how the brain deals with trauma, deals with moments in your life that you were on high alert, and that your chemicals were really firing. Those are the moments that people remember the most. Or they can also be the moments that you train yourself not to recall, because they're so nostalgic, and they bring back those same chemicals and that same feeling. And so for me, it was the hours of chemotherapy. Now, sitting with Rachel in the hospital was part of it. And we did that for a lot of hours. Because on her chemo day, we'd wake up early, really early, 7. And we'd try to get there for 8 o'clock, because the earlier you got there, even though you were scheduled at a certain point, but the full day was usually about anywhere between 8 to 10 hours. And it was always hard. And God, I look back and I think about the stress that the way I dealt with the stress, but I wish I am the worst in the morning, and I wish I was better some of those mornings and more understanding because Rachel must have been going through hell knowing what she's about to go do. And thank God I got to be with her for every infusion. And she had over a year of chemo every other week, and it would be 8 to 10 hours in the hospital for the worst part of it, where she would receive her oxaliplatin, and when she was sent home, the rest of the 72 hours, because each infusion every other week was 3 days long, 72 hours. She would be sent home with a pump, so we would get home after 5, usually around then. And, and the oxaliplatin was the worst of it. The irinotecan and the oxaliplatin are the most, the heaviest of the cocktail that she would get, and none of the three caused her to lose her hair, but it was one of the most brutal chemo cocktails you can receive. Because she was so young and healthy, they decided to just give her the three of the most difficult as far as side effects go, and how aggressive the chemo was. It was irinotecan, oxaliplatin, and 5-FU, fluorouracil, was her cocktail. And so she would receive the oxaliplatin in the hospital in a very hot room with the huge windows, floor-to-ceiling windows, just a really tiny, tiny little space. And she would sit in a chair, and she would receive that. Part of the chemo she did, there was a few weeks that she did a clinical trial where she had a port in her abdomen, and the chemo would go directly into her gut, into her abdominal cavity, and that would be the oxaliplatin would go directly into her abdominal cavity, and she would still get sent home with the fluorouracil, the pump, the 5-FU, irinotecan, and things like that. But we found out early that this is why nurses are so important. And the worse your condition, I shouldn't say that, the worse your diagnosis, the more invasive and painful the disease can be, the more important it is to have the right nurse and to be consistent with that nurse, especially during chemo, because there are small nuances that you'll learn about yourself if you're there and you're a chemo patient receiving that treatment, or about the person that you're sitting with. You'll discover very small nuances, things that make it easier for them and things that make it just a brutal nightmare for them. And for Rachel, oxaliplatin she was allergic to. So before you get the oxaliplatin and the chemo infusion, you're injected with hormones, a heavy dose of steroids and hormones. So what happens is, you will, in preparation for the chemo, you'll receive a shot of hormones and steroids. Because the chemo is going to wipe out all of your natural hormones. So you're injected with that ahead of time, and the steroids to try to minimize the inflammation or any of the side effects that may occur. But what happens is, when you receive that shot of hormones, your emotions go crazy. So not only are you about to embark on a 72-hour infusion of just god-awful medicine that wipes out every good living cell in your body, along with the cancer, with the worst side effects known to man. There's that fear, and then before it begins, they inject you with all these hormones, so it can cause chaos, just utter chaos, in your body, in your brain. And poor Rachel, we didn't like to talk about it. I wouldn't bring it up or anything. Like, what's the point in someone asking how did it go, and then me telling them, well, in the beginning, she lost it. It would be pointless for me to talk about that. But, 2 years later, and me being in therapy and everything, and this is the stuff that comes up, the moments before chemo, that I would watch Rachel really lose it. In the very end, when Rachel was dying, it was more peaceful even than the days before her chemo infusions, some of her infusions. Watching her just lose all hope and control and crying and stuff would be, it's the stuff that really sticks with me and is hard to get through. It's just hard to think about any of the moments that I left to go to the bathroom or anything, or grab like a snack. I wish I hadn't. I wish I had just, you pick apart every single second that you're with her, with the person that you lost. And I'm just so glad I was there. My goal on chemo days was simple. My goal was to make sure that I could be the bad guy for her and say all of the things that were tough to say, like she needed to get an injection of Benadryl, IV Benadryl, before receiving oxaliplatin. And let's say she went and showed up on a chemo day and her regular nurse wasn't there, or she got a different nurse. That nurse wouldn't know to give her an injection of Benadryl necessarily, because some of those things aren't written down by the doctor. They're just notes. They're nurse's notes, so that particular nurse knows that an injection of Benadryl helps Rachel, so that in the first 10-20 minutes of her oxali infusion, she won't completely get swollen and itchy and will have to stop the infusion, which will create a longer day. She'll have to be there longer. So there were little things like that. Also, sometimes they try to pack in multiple appointments during your chemo infusion. So we'd go in. Sometimes we would see her oncologist ahead of time. Usually we wouldn't, but there would be days where we'd meet with her oncologist ahead of time. And there were days where Rachel couldn't get the infusion because she just fucking couldn't. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it, just wasn't prepared. You need to be mentally prepared for that infusion. And if you're not in that space, and if there's something else going on, you just can't do it. And her doctor would say, I'm not going to give you an infusion today. I just don't think you're prepared for it, which is fine in the long run. I think about chemo now, and I think about whether it was worth it to continue as long as Rachel did. And I'm not so sure. In the beginning, it really helped her with the pain. It shrunk the size of the tumor enough so she could have she could live and walk and function. But her first infusion was one of the worst experiences. We were just up all night, and finally they got the right nurse in and the right amount of comfort medication where she fell asleep hard on her back for the first time in months. She was able to fall asleep. It was beautiful. And because she was able to fall asleep, I was too. And we just laid in the hospital room, and it really started in the morning. The sun was coming up, and spent the day sleeping next to each other. It was nice. while she was hooked up to the pump.